So today what we're going to be doing, I want to make sure y'all know where everything is that's current, and then we're going to talk about your rights. So we're going to start Unit 3, which is dealing with civil rights and civil liberties. So we're going to go and review our Bill of Rights today, which we already did the Bill of Rights. We did that at the beginning of the year, and we're going to hit them again so y'all remember what they are, because they come into play with a lot of these Supreme Court cases. And the Supreme Court cases, even though you don't need to know them exactly how it was intended at the beginning of the year, you are still going to need to know them and what they're about and how they intertwine with these rights that we have. So we tried a full course live on MS Teams, and it was awful. So we're not going to have many of those again. That's just how it's going to be, because people can't behave properly. So what I want you to do, if you are interested, send me a remind message if you would like to be in a small study session. That's how I want to do these lives, because it's just not something that I can do. I can't police everybody while their screens are up. I can't make you, do better, because I'm way over here and you're way over there and you're taking advantage of it. So small study sessions, 10 to 15 people. We've had one already. I think it was pretty productive. People got to ask questions. People were polite, and it was generally appreciated. So anyway, so y'all know where things are. Make sure my website, I have updated already for the new unit. Stuff has already been put up there. There are new things on Google Classroom that I have recently put up there, specifically dealing with documents and court cases. College Board's website, please check it, every day. Just click, see what's there, see if anything's new. The bureaucracy progress check is there. Bureaucracy and judicial branch progress check is there. A couple of you guys have already taken it. Thank you. You did exactly what I asked you to do. And then the FRQs, I have a ton of FRQs that are up there for you to practice. Middle of the month, College Board is going to be putting out this practice test, kind of a simulation on how to do it, so you guys can practice through the timing and everything. So pay attention to that stuff. And then obviously, lastly, please watch the 2 p.m. Miss Hitchcock U.S. Government and Politics review sessions. This week, she is basically breaking down that fourth FRQ, which is the argumentative essay. Y'all need to pay attention to that. That's the one that we didn't really tackle yet. We started it here and there, but that was actually supposed to be the end of March, and all of April was perfecting our FRQs. So that's what she's doing for me, and I appreciate her immensely. All right, so today, like I said, we're dealing with our rights. Things that you will need if you want to follow along with how I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to do a little different, because I'm going to let y'all pretend like you're in class. Your textbook, we're going to be looking at page 26, 233, 234 through 235, and we will move into chapter 9, and we'll start with civil rights. I will ask you to do your part in understanding this chapter, because again, I'm here, you're there. I am going to post assignments for this unit. Right now, everything is considered enrichment, but just know, the day that they say school is going back, every one of those assignments I've put up since we have been out becomes actual assignments. So those of y'all that are keeping up and doing what I'm asking you to do, you are a huge step ahead of everybody else. I suggest you guys take notes. I know that sounds weird because I'm over here and you're over there, but this is how they do it with virtual school. Many of you have flat out refused to take notes this year. You are at a huge disadvantage if you have chosen not to take any kind of notes this year, because guess what? The exam is open notes. So some of y'all have, again, a huge advantage over everybody else. So to be able to listen and wait for the live session. I got rid of the live session. That was what I posted on that first one. We're not going to have a live session, and except for these small ones. So this will not end up becoming a live session. I was intending it to be, and then I had our first one on MS Teams, and it was a disaster. So I'm going to play along as if you guys are live. So I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds to think and answer and stuff like that. Okay, so in your book on page 637, that's where you can find the Bill of Rights. All the way in the back are all those documents. If you've never actually cracked your book open, that's a huge piece of your book, are those documents in the back. You can go online, or if you have a copy from first semester, grab that, have it out, because it will help you in the process that we're going to go through. Look them over, see which ones that, you know, stand out to you as being important, not important, and so on and so forth. I want you guys to, when I get to the next slide, I want you to read, I want you to think, and then I want you to come up with answers. Like I said, I'm going to give you a couple seconds to kind of think through things and stuff like that. Like right now I'm still talking, so you can get out your Bill of Rights. This is not going to be live, but try to think through this stuff as I go through it with you. That's kind of how this is supposed to work. All right, so I want you guys to read over the Bill of Rights. Look them over. There's 10 of them. You can do this. And each one of these is a protection. Every one of those rights is a protection from the government. So it's things that we have that the government cannot remove from us. Then think about which of those rights that are in the list are super duper important to you. You're like, oh my gosh, this one is really, really important. So I'm going to quickly kind of read through them, just the main points. I don't want to go through every single one of them. So your First Amendment. All right, First Amendment, freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. And now what we're going to do in another class like this is I'm going to break each one of those down so you realize all freedoms have limits, okay? So the freedom of speech, yes, but. The freedom of religion, yes, but. Okay, so these are protections from the government, but they are not, you know, all-encompassing. We can say whatever we want, whenever we want, however we want, and stuff like that. It's not like that. Okay, so that's Amendment 1. Amendment 2 is your right to bear arms. And I am literally reading from the page I told you to go to. Third Amendment, no quartering of soldiers during times of peace. The Fourth Amendment is dealing with illegal searches and seizures. So basically your rights concerning what the police or the FBI or whoever can do with your stuff. What can they search? What can they take? What can they seize? Amendment 5 is dealing with the rights of the accused and your property rights. Now, Amendment 5 is also, there's something that's going to be incorporated, which we're going to talk about incorporation doctrine in a couple classes. Something called the Miranda rights have been added into those, your Fifth Amendment, your Fifth Amendment rights, the rights of the accused. So there is a case, Miranda versus Arizona, that is going to happen, which we actually talked about this year, early this year. And once that case happened and we realized that a person accused of a crime is innocent until proven guilty, they need to know what their rights are, because sometimes they don't know what their rights are. Or if, you know, say, speaking about my family are immigrants. They wouldn't have known, say, my grandfather, he wouldn't know exactly what his rights are upon coming to this country. So you need to know the rights of the accused. And then 5 is also dealing with property rights. 6 is additional rights of the accused concerning, like, you get the right to counsel, which is an attorney and things like that. 7 is dealing with civil law. Okay, so that's civil suits, how you can, you know, sue somebody. You can't sue somebody for less than 20 bucks. That'd be sad if you did. Amendment 8, bail, fine, and punishments. Okay, so that means we can't have excessive bail. So if you steal a Snickers bar, your bail is not going to be $1 million. And you can't punish somebody excessively. Like, I can't hang you up by your toenails upside down and tickle you. That would be considered excessive punishment. All right, Amendment 9 and 10. 9 is dealing with rights not listed. It's basically saying that you have more rights. We just didn't list them all. And then the 10th Amendment is y'all should remember that one from federalism. That's anything not in this Constitution belongs to the states. Okay, so that's that separation of state and federal government. And we know that the 10th Amendment tends to be abused a little bit by the federal government, where the states have lost lots and lots of their powers. Okay, so you've had time to think. So now I want you guys to think about when I call out the most, the top 5 of most people, I want you guys to think about that. What similarities do you find among the rights that most people ranked as the top 5 and most important? So this is based off of me teaching this class for 7 years, 6 years. Anyway, teaching this class that long. Amendment 1 is always number 1. It has never not been number 1. Amendment 2 has always been in the top 5. Amendment 4 has always been in the top 5. 5 and 6, Amendment 5 and Amendment 6, dealing with the rights of the accused, those are usually in the top 5, one or the other, or sometimes both. And then Amendment 8, which is dealing with excessive fines and excessive punishments. Now, if those lined up with the same ones that you did, that's pretty typical. Those tend to be the most important, those top 5 of everybody. Now, I want you guys to think about, do you think those responses would change based on demographics? So if I went and I asked, people that were 55 and older, what are your top 5 rights within the Bill of Rights? Would they be the same? Would the rights have similar rankings to students, or are you guys different? What about place in history? If I went back to the time during World War II or the Great Depression and asked them, what are your top 5 rights from the Bill of Rights? Would they be the same? There's a good chance a lot of these would be very different depending on time period, age, family. That's the next one I have written on here. Would the rights have been a similar ranking if your parents are lawyers, ministers, if you have convicted felons in your family, members in the military? So a lot of demographics play into what rights are really important to people. Like, we hear a lot about the Second Amendment right. That's certain groups of people, certain demographics, that is incredibly important to them. Sometimes it might be their livelihood. Sometimes it might be their hunters. Sometimes it could just be that they're like, this is a fundamental right that was listed in the 1700s, so I should have it, period. Okay. So I want y'all to think about demographics and rights and how that can change, but also think about, why is it wrong for the government, the United States federal government, to infringe on these individual rights? So like right now, there's an interesting thing going on where, I don't know if y'all have seen it online, but there is a church in central Louisiana, and they have been continuing to have service at the church. They actually have about 10 buses that they drive around different places in the Baton Rouge area, and they drive the people to the church. So they are not social distancing, okay? Now, according to the governor, we are supposed to be social distancing. We're not supposed to be meeting in groups of more than, I believe it's 10. And in those groups of 10, we should be 6 feet apart at least. Well, there's a pastor in Central who has not exactly followed those rules. And his argument is that we have the right to religion, to practice our religion freely. So the governor, according to him, the governor can't tell him how to do the religion that he is doing, which I don't even know. I'm assuming it's Christianity. So anyway, does the government have the right to infringe upon people's rights to go to church right now? It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. It's definitely a First Amendment issue that could possibly end up in court one day based on what's going on with the coronavirus and all of these limitations that the government has put on. All right, so the Bill of Rights, like I said, are protections. We have life, liberty, and property. We know that. That's stuff we learned from John Locke. But the Bill of Rights are kind of an extension of those natural human rights. So we have what we're born with, life, liberty, and property, which turned into life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that nobody should be able to live without those things. The Bill of Rights is going to basically be ways that the government creates a way of not being able to take those things away from us. Okay, so it's our protections from the government. So the Bill of Rights was written to protect us from the government taking away our natural rights, life, liberty, property, or pursuit of happiness. All right, so let's talk about civil rights and public policy. I am going to sit on 3 big topics. That doesn't mean civil rights doesn't deal with tons of different people. I kind of use what the book does, which is the big 3: African Americans, women, and LGBTQ. Okay, now you could add all kinds of different people in there, so please don't think that I'm not considering them. But the book hits on 3 specific things, so I'm going to hit on those 3 specific things. Okay, we could have a whole class just on Native American civil rights issues. So I'm sticking with the book right now, sticking with the curriculum. Okay, so here are all of our rights. We have our first 10, which are on your left, and then I have some other things that technically can be shoved into those 10. Freedom to express yourself, freedom to worship as you wish, the right to a prompt and fair trial, that squeezes in there. The right to vote. The government can't take away your right to vote unless, and that's, if you are incarcerated while there is a vote going on. Right to apply for federal employment requiring U.S. citizenship, the right to run for an elected office. That's not in the Bill of Rights, but obviously you have that right if you have the qualifications for that. Freedom to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The government cannot get in your way for having those things, okay? So the Bill of Rights is there to kind of encompass and be an umbrella for all of these other things as well. And we can list rights, all day, basically. I just gave y'all a quick little list so y'all can see. It's not just what's in the Bill of Rights, it is other things as well. Okay, in your desk pods, no, we're not in our desk pods. So let's pretend that we're in class, and I'm going to go through some scenarios. Now, I introduced some of these scenarios in the first semester with you guys, so some of this is going to be review. I want y'all to play along like you were in class, okay? So things you need to figure out. With every scenario that I read, which right, if any, is being violated? Second thing, which amendment, if any, is going to offer protection to such a violation, okay? So you're looking for, was a right violated, yes or no, or not, might not be at all. And what is it? And which amendment offers protection, okay? Okay, so scenario 1, and again, you guys, some of these are review. We've seen these before, but I need to make sure you know your Bill of Rights. Jenny, an 18-year-old college student is arrested for stealing a classmate's designer sweater and selling it on eBay. Dirty. When Jenny appears before the judge, she asks for a lawyer to help defend her. The judge tells her that if she is smart enough to be in college, she knows enough to defend herself. Besides, she's not charged with a felony, so the stakes are not very high. So I want y'all to think about this. If you need to, read through it again. Is there a violation of Jenny, of her rights? And what amendment protects that particular thing? So I'll give y'all a couple seconds. All right, so if you have your Bill of Rights with you and open like I asked you to, you could probably look through real quick and find, okay, yes, definitely, there is a violation of an amendment. If you are thinking the 6th Amendment, you are correct. It's the 6th Amendment says that you have the right to have the assistance of counsel, which means you have the right to have an attorney. If you know your Miranda rights, which is incorporated into the 5th Amendment, you would know that one will be appointed to you if you cannot afford one. Okay, now this is actually going to come out of a specific court case called Gideon versus Wainwright, in which Gideon is going to not be given his counsel. He's poor, he can't afford one, so on and so forth. And they go through a trial, and he's just like, so Gideon versus Wainwright is going to make sure that you have counsel afforded to you. Okay, scenario 2, Suzette. Suzette bought a house and spent years restoring it. Okay, I have an aunt who did this, so I know this is time consuming and money consuming. She loves her home. One day she gets a notice that the local government is going to take her property in order to turn her land over to a private company. The local government says it can take Suzette's home because the new jobs and tax revenue created by the company will benefit the public. Okay, so can the government come in and take stuff like that from you? Can they, you know, say, I'm sorry, but we're going to need to bulldoze your house. Here's some money for the worth of your house. Peace out. You have 30 days. And the answer to that is yes. As much as you would like that to be a violation of your rights, because it is for public good and public use, and tax revenue can be gotten from it, it is completely okay. It is called eminent domain when the government basically says, we need your land, we need your property, get off. Now they do pay you, you know, fair value for your stuff, but it's gone. They can bulldoze it, they can use it, they can do whatever they want after that point if they can say this is for the greater good of the community. Now this is going to come from another court case. All of these are related to court cases. It's called Kelo versus the City of New London, in which a woman had a kind of like a big lot of land that she intended to build on but never did. And the City of New London, I believe that's in Connecticut, they basically told her, they're like, you're not doing anything with this land, we're taking it. We're going to build a little strip mall on it and we're going to make revenue. We're going to get jobs, we're going to get tax money, blah, blah, blah. And that's where eminent domain kind of, that term is going to be derived from, is that particular issue. And that's in 2005. So that's very recent. So yes, the government can take your stuff and say, we're going to use it. Okay, scenario number 3. Carolyn is arrested for shoplifting a candy bar from a grocery store. At trial, she is found guilty. The judge decides that the right punishment is to cut off Carolyn's hands so she will not be able to shoplift again. All right, so you should already know you can't do that. It is a violation of the 8th Amendment, which is dealing with excessive punishments, no cruel and unusual punishment. You cannot do that. So that is a protection that Carolyn has from the government. They cannot cut off her hands. That is Hammurabi's code. We do not do that. Okay, scenario 4. Congress wants to find ways to cut costs because of the soaring budget deficit. Congress passes a law to require American citizens to house U.S. soldiers in their homes during peacetime. Automatically, you should go to one specific amendment that is not really something we think about anymore, which is amendment number 3, no quartering of soldiers during a time of peace. We will never have to do that. That is a protection from the government. All right, going kind of quick through these now. Scenario 5, Brett's science teacher asks the class to exchange papers to correct last night's homework. Brett refuses to let anyone except the teacher see his homework. I love Brett. And is sent to the principal. So is there any kind of, right that he has to do what he did? There is no violation. You can, according to the ruling of, let me see if I can read it, Owasso Independent School District, there is no violation. So Brett can do that. He does not have to give other people his papers. Now you know. All right, scenario 6, concerned about rising crime, lawmakers for the District of Columbia, so that's Washington, D.C., ban all handguns in the city and require that shotguns be kept unloaded and or disassembled. Now, if any of y'all did some of the work you were supposed to do, which was on the hyperdoc, you know this answer already because you know the court case that it has to deal with. So it is a violation of, we already know, guns. We can go straight to the amendment. Second Amendment, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And this is going to be according to District of Columbia versus Heller, okay? Which you can connect very easily to our required McDonald versus Chicago case, okay? So there's an easy connection piece. If they have anything on the test concerning guns, there's a good chance they're going to use DC versus Heller and McDonald versus Chicago. Okay, McDonald is the one that is required. You could also possibly use U.S. Lopez in it, even though it's very vague that it wouldn't really work as well. But yeah, McDonald versus Chicago and DC versus Heller are easy connection cases. Okay, scenario 7. John, a 14-year-old public student, wears a shirt to school that says, "Be happy, not gay," to express his belief that homosexuality is wrong. His dean tells him he must change his shirt or be suspended from school. John refuses, so he's like, "I'm not taking off my shirt. This is my shirt," and is suspended for a week. So can that actually happen? And being school children, you guys probably already know this answer too. It could, because obviously the first thing you're going to think of is like, he has the right to express himself. That's a First Amendment right. However, there is an issue. Could what he has on his shirt do something, insult, hurt, whatever, someone else? That's kind of how you have to think about this if you're thinking about it as a justice of the Supreme Court, is what's going on. Is it taking away someone else's rights, possibly? Okay, so this goes back to a freedom of speech issue, which connects to a case that we will need to know and we are going to talk about, which is Tinker versus Des Moines. Tinker versus Des Moines is dealing with something that happened during the Vietnam War, in which some school children wore plain black armbands with a little peace sign on it. It was kind of like a protest, but it was a silent, very non-violent protest. Students wearing armbands. Well, the school system is going to suspend the Tinker kids as well as some other kids that were doing it. And John and Mary Beth Tinker, their family is going to say, "No, school system, you can't do that. You can't tell my kid, you know, you can't wear that," because they're not doing anything wrong. They're not hurting anybody. So Tinker versus Des Moines, it is going to basically create that you do have freedom of speech in school so long as it is not promoting anything illegal. It is not hurting another group or another student. And it's basically peaceful. Okay, so an example of something that we did where there was no issues was, y'all remember the thing that I have on my ceiling in the classroom, the big yellow sign that talks about the March walkout? Well, that was after the Parkland shooting, and that was allowed. No kid got in trouble. No kid was suspended. A bunch of kids wore all black that day as part of the protest, but they did it properly. They asked permission. They said, "This is what we're doing," and things like that. And nothing that they did was hurtful to anybody. So it didn't infringe on anybody else's rights. So with that said, it could be a violation of First Amendment, but because he is in a school and there could possibly be homosexual students in that school, wearing something like that could be offensive to them. Therefore, their rights are being infringed upon. So yes, the school can do that. Plus there's rules in the school that says you're not supposed to wear stuff like that. All right, scenario 8. 13-year-old Marianne is a freshman in high school. She is an honor student and wants to sing in the choir. When she arrives at choir practice, the teacher tells her she must take a drug test if she wants to participate in any extracurricular activities. Marianne refuses and is kicked out of choir. Okay, so is there a violation? I want y'all to think about that. Some of y'all already know this because of how you are involved in school. There is no violation. There is a court case. There's always a court case. According to the Board of Education of Potawatomi versus Earls, there can be drug tests for anything that is considered extracurricular. So that can literally mean sports. That can mean anything. Now, if you're taking choir as a class, that's different, because that's on your schedule. If it's extracurricular, then yes, there technically can be drug tests, which is crazy to think about. Usually we think of it just because of sports. All right, you guys. So let's talk about rights and how they work. And we're going to talk about those big 3 groups, like I said, the book talks about, which is African Americans, women, and LGBTQ community. I'm going to go all the way through African Americans, mainly because a lot of you guys have been going through the plight of African Americans, you know, literally since kindergarten. So that's what I'm going to go through, because I think it's stuff that you already know, so it's going to be familiar to you. Then we're going to talk about, and I want you guys to read through your book a little bit about the other two, okay? So again, civil rights, the textbook definition: policies designed to protect people against arbitrary and discriminatory treatment by the government or government officials or individuals, okay? Your rights are protections. Now, when we talk civil rights, a lot of y'all will think of very specific things, but there are many civil rights movements that have existed. Civil rights are the rights individuals will receive equal treatment and to be free from unfair treatment or discrimination in a number of settings, including education, employment, housing, and more, based on certain legally protected characteristics, okay? And that is from findlaw.com. That's something very, an easy one to go to when you want to know some specific law terms. So I want y'all to think about that. Civil rights is not just something that the African Americans went through. There's women's civil rights, there's disabled, handicapped civil rights, there's Native American civil rights, there's LGBTQ civil, I mean, literally any smaller group has had some kind of civil rights struggle, okay? So we're going to talk race first. We're going to go with African Americans, and then I'm going to kind of lead y'all through the other two. We're going to talk a little bit about gender discrimination at the very, very end, because again, that's, I want you guys, I'm going to talk about the familiar stuff, which is, y'all know racial discrimination, but I'm going to talk about some of the intricate details. And then also discrimination based on age, sexual orientation, and other factors. I'm going to stick with the big three: race, gender, sexual orientation. But no, there are tons of other smaller groups that have received some form of discrimination. All right, so a lot of this is going to come back to one amendment, okay? This is outside of the first 10 amendments. This is the 14th Amendment, and it says, all persons born or naturalized, so anybody who has citizenship in the United States and subject to jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So you're a citizen of the United States, that means you are also going to be a citizen wherever you live. No state shall make, and by the way, a lot of these amendments will start out with no state shall, because it's a protection. A state or a government cannot. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities, this is called the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment, of citizens of the United States. So when you're looking at that clauses paper that I put up on Google Classroom, that right there, that is your Privileges and Immunities Clause. No state shall make or enforce a law which shall abridge or take away or make smaller the privileges and immunities of a citizen of the United States. All right, next clause. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. This is called your Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which means you get a lawyer, you get a speedy trial, you get, you know, a jury of your peers, if that's part of how that particular trial works. You get justices or judges, all of those things you get, and it all happens in a certain way. That is due process of law, innocent before proven guilty. Nor, and that's, again, that's your due process clause of the 14th Amendment, and then nor deny any person within its jurisdiction, remember what the word jurisdiction means, the equal protection of laws. This is called your equal protection clause, which means if you are a citizen, born or naturalized, all laws pertain to you. If you are funny looking, they can't say, well, we're not going, that law, no, sorry, you're going to jail just because you're funny looking. They can't do that. They have to follow the law. They cannot take these rights away from you. Okay, so as I'm going to go through African American discrimination of rights, I want you guys to think about these questions. When did the discrimination begin? Where was the discrimination common? Okay, some of y'all can probably already think of some very specific things where there was common discrimination. Why did white Americans dislike this group? Okay, and y'all, that goes back to the beginnings of us. Okay, the beginnings of America before it was America. How did white Americans demonstrate their dislike? And when did conditions improve for this group? And what were some of the government actions? Government actions are going to be called policy. Okay, what policies, laws, statutes, regulations are put in place to help the group? Okay, and again, you guys probably know some of this, so this should be kind of reviewy. All right, so there's your due process clause, and there's your equal protection clause. That's the main two that we're going to be talking about today. All right, so in 1865, I'm going to move down because from 1619 to 1862, for the most part, you guys should know that stuff. That's stuff that you learned in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. If you took human geography, you probably learned a little bit about it as well. So I want to start towards the bottom, okay? Because not very many of you guys have really gotten very far into what happened with the Civil War, other than what you've kind of heard or watched and things like that. Okay, 1865 is a big deal day, okay? Big deal year. The 13th Amendment is going to be passed, and this means slavery is abolished, okay? Not just slavery, but also what's called involuntary servitude. So sometimes there were people that were in servitude, and they didn't want to be, but they were kind of stuck in the situation. So it's also going to be concerning them as well. So slavery is abolished. That is a huge deal. That right there should be, you know, time to celebrate, right? Well, that's not what happens, because we have the entire South who has been completely engrossed in this idea that economy equals slavery. We have to have them to have the economy that we have. Okay, so that's a huge deal, because now that's not a thing. Okay, so some of the stuff that's going to happen between 1866 and 1953 are going to be goods and bads. Okay, so we have the 13th Amendment in 1865. 1868, we have the 14th Amendment, which is going to happen. So that's going to be another big hooray, because that's saying that African Americans are U.S. citizens and guarantees them equal protection under the law. 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, now pertains to African Americans. This guarantee is widely ignored, though, for about a century, because people suck. Let's be honest. In 1870, the 15th Amendment is going to happen, which is a huge, amazing thing that's going to happen. And it says that you cannot discriminate based on race concerning voting. Okay, so that's going to be something that gets rid of African American male disenfranchisement, or so it's supposed to. We know it doesn't, right? Because we have those three things that are going to be in the way: poll taxes, literacy tests, and the grandfather clause. So all of these things are great, but the citizens, specifically white citizens at the time, are going to find ways to squish these great accomplishments of the government. Okay, 1877, end of Reconstruction. Now, during Reconstruction, the South is going to get punished big time by the North. So there are going to be gains because of this punishment, but as soon as the North is no longer kind of having their thumb on the South is going to go a little crazy with being kind of like huge jerks concerning African Americans and their rights. So the end of Reconstruction is going to happen. African American gains in the South are going to be squished. That's where we have the beginnings of Jim Crow laws that are going to come in. Jim Crow laws are not necessarily written on the books, so they're not like on paper. They could be something that is just a practice that is called de facto, meaning you just do it because everybody else is. Everybody else is discriminating against them. I'm going to discriminate against them too. Okay, I know that sounds ridiculous, but it is a means of discrimination. There's also something called de jure, which means by way of law. Okay, so depends on where you are. One or both could be happening if you're African American during this particular time period. Okay, so Reconstruction ends, and that is a bad thing for African Americans, because now the South is on its own, the North is not watching over it, and bad stuff's going to happen now. All right, so 1883, we have some civil rights cases that are going to come up, which deals with the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment does not prohibit discrimination by private businesses. So if you own your own business and you want to be a jerk and say, no, you can't come into my business because you're Black, according to these cases that come out in the 1880s. It's okay to do that, okay? 1896 is going to be an interesting year because Plessy versus Ferguson is going to happen. We've talked about Homer Plessy before in another one. Remember Homer Plessy, he is 1/8 African American. He is purposely going to get himself in trouble because he wants to make a point. Him and the Creole Citizens Committee, they want to make a point. They want to say, this is wrong to have separate cars. That's ridiculous. And what's going to come out of that is the justices at the time, remember, the justices that are on the court are put there by presidents. And they're going to continue whatever the president's ideas were. That's the legacy, remember? So in the 1890s, when this is happening, they are going to basically say, no, separate and equal things are perfectly okay. So that means separate bathrooms, separate water fountains, separate schools, separate buses or separate sections of buses, separate areas in restaurants. All of these things are okay. Separate but equal is okay, according to our justices on the Supreme Court in 1896, which we now know what happens, because about 70 years later, they're like, no, that's insane. You can't do that. So some good stuff does come out, though. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, is going to be founded by African Americans and whites. So it's kind of a committee that's going to be for advancing this discriminated group. Okay, so good stuff is happening and bad stuff is happening. So it's going to come to a head eventually. So I have some other things that are listed there, 1915 through 1950, different things that are going to happen, goods and bads. Okay, so in the era of the civil rights, what's going to happen is, like I said, 70 or so years later, after Plessy versus Ferguson, we're going to hit Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, which we have talked about in a previous lecture concerning the judicial branch. It is going to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson, which is super great because separate but equal facilities is ridiculous because, yes, they were separate, but no, they were never equal, okay? Schools segregation is basically unconstitutional, okay? And they are going to create all kinds of things to make sure that schools do not favor a specific group, okay? Interestingly enough, in Baton Rouge, the reason that we had the busing system that we had for so long for schools it goes back to Brown versus Board of Education and desegregating schools. So in 1954, we're supposed to desegregate everything. We can go to the bathroom in the same bathrooms. We can drink from the same water fountains. We can sit with each other at a restaurant. We can sit together in a bus. All these things are supposed to happen. Do you think they did? Absolutely not. School integration specifically, some schools didn't even integrate until the 1970s. Lafayette Parish did not integrate until 1971. And in the opinion of the court, they tell the school systems to integrate schools with a deliberate speed. Okay, so there's definitely schools that basically were like, no, I'm not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Which I'm sure y'all remember me showing you guys the pictures of the Little Rock Nine, in which the National Guard was actually called in to protect 9 African American students, to be able to go to school, which is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so busing of students, that's where, you know, we have the issue in Baton Rouge. We actually had a 44-year case that was dealing with the busing of students. And some schools are going to use by law, which is basically going to say, okay, we have to do it, and some of them are going to do it de facto. So some schools are not going to necessarily listen to what the Supreme Court says. As far as the school systems go, this kind of goes along with what I was talking about. If you look, you can see the percentage of integration that happens and the years in which it's going to happen. Okay, so Ms. Hitchcock has talked about looking at graphs and looking at things. There is a possibility with the concept application FRQ that you could still have a graph involved. So it says percentage of Black students attending school with any whites in Southern states. So this is specific to Southern states. And you can see almost nothing until we hit 1964. And then it has a pretty decent movement up, but it's not, I mean, it's not 100% like it's supposed to. It's not the law being followed like it's supposed to. And like I said, 1971, Lafayette Parish is going to finally integrate. My mom integrated when she was in 3rd grade. And what they did was they took a handful of white kids from the all-white school and a handful of Black kids from the all-Black school and threw them at the other schools. And that's what they said was integration. So I'm sure it was a very difficult thing to experience. Being the odd man out in any school is a difficult experience. If you've ever moved from one school to a new school, imagine doing that, but then having all of the stigma of being a discriminated minority. It doesn't sound like a great thing. So eventually, though, we do know that schools have integrated. Now, we can look around at different schools all over America, and they're not necessarily even, if you know what I mean. And a lot of that has to do with demographics and where people live and stuff like that. But we have integrated according to what the law has said. Okay, so during the era of civil rights, we have the Civil Rights Act that is also going to be happening. So remember I said the questions you had to answer in your head while we were going through this. What did the government do? Number one, Brown versus Board of Education is a huge move forward. Those 3 amendments in the 1800s are huge moves forward. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, usually you'll see it as the CRA, it made racial discrimination illegal in places like hotels and restaurants and other public accommodations, which, if you go back to Brown versus Board of Education, technically it's saying separate but equal is illegal, right? And that's in 1954. It takes 10 years for the government to say, wait, y'all aren't doing what states, y'all are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You are not integrating things. So we had to create an act, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that basically says, no, you have to integrate hotels, restaurants, public accommodations, and you cannot discriminate. You cannot say you can't stay at my hotel because you're African American. That is illegal after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It forbade employment discrimination based on race. So you can't say, well, you're Black, I'm not hiring you. Could not do that. And that's a practice that actually did happen very regularly. It created something called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. If you all ever fill out an application, somewhere at the bottom of the application in little bitty letters, it will say we are an equal opportunity employer. And that is because of this act from 1964. Legally, every place that exists has to be an equal opportunity employer. So long as you have the prereqs, like, you have a degree if you're supposed to have a degree to do that job and stuff like that. And it strengthened voting right legislation. Now, we will have a Voting Rights Act that comes out as well, which is another good thing to help out this particular discriminated group. And also remember, there are more than one Civil Rights Act. There's a few of them. So I suggest you look in your book just to check out what each one did, because they did do different things, and each one kind of has multiple things that it helped different groups with. Okay. All right. So if we go back where it says forbade employment discrimination based on race, what's going to come out of that is something called affirmative action. Okay. You may have heard of it before, not 100% sure if you have, but affirmative action is a policy designed to give special attention to or compensatory treatment of members of previously disadvantaged groups. Okay. So what that means is, if you are hiring people, you're a business owner and you're hiring people, if you purposely do not look at anybody who checks off Black as their race, you can get in trouble. Okay. Colleges, certain employers and things like that have to look at race. Interestingly enough, one of the ones that I've used before as an example is sports. If you are a sports team and you lose your head coach, as far as like the NFL, let's just use NFL, your coach is gone, you need a new coach. it is required that at least one person that is interviewed is of a formally discriminated group. So usually that's going to talk, we're talking about African Americans. Today, they might even start including women, I'm not sure. But you have to include at least one person to interview that is African American. And that goes through a lot of different industries where you have to interview or allow African American applicants to be looked at. And that goes back to the Civil Rights Act, making sure that employment opportunities are equal across the board. Okay. Affirmative action is going to eventually go into colleges as well, where, you know, because some colleges, African Americans were discriminated against concerning the application process. And affirmative action is going to equalize that to make sure that colleges are looking at and accepting certain percentages of African Americans into their colleges. Which goes back to what I was just saying. In education, there is a court case involved, which is the University of California versus Bakke, which happened in 1978. And it basically says that you cannot discriminate based on who is applying to your college. That is illegal. Race discrimination for college applications is not okay. However, it also is interesting because then affirmative action will also go against the non-discriminated group. So sometimes people will be looked over because they're white, or they're Asian, or they're something else. And an African American will be chosen over somebody because of affirmative action. So it's interesting because it's had some back and forth, some goods and bads concerning it. There's a few cases concerning affirmative action in which people said, I was passed over for someone with less credentials than me because they are of another race. So there has been court cases in recent years concerning that. I believe there's a court case in Texas and a court case in Michigan concerning that as well. Concerning employment, here are some court cases that you can kind of look at that could be connector cases. United Steelworks versus Weber, which basically is dealing with quotas, having a certain number of people of other races working for your industry. So, you know, you have to have 100 African Americans working in this industry, and if you don't, you can get in trouble, that kind of thing. Adirondack Constructors versus Pena, which is in 1995, to be constitutional, affirmative action must be narrowly tailored to meet a compelling government interest, and that's going to come from the Supreme Court. It does not ban affirmative action, but it does limit it. So in 1995, there is going to be a limit to affirmative action specifically in the workplace. All right, so let's finish up and talk about these other groups, okay? Now, what I want y'all to do is we're going to mark out the word white Americans in here, since we're no longer talking specifically about race. We're talking about other groups, which could be of any race. When we're talking about women, now, I would like you guys to actually read through this. Page 322 to 326 is all about women's rights. So think about these questions. When did discrimination begin? Where was the discrimination most common? Why did Americans, remember we're going to scratch out that the word white now, because now we're dealing with all different races. Why did Americans dislike this group? Why did Americans demonstrate their dislike? How? When did conditions improve, and what are government actions? Remember, government actions equals policy, laws, statutes, ordinances, acts, resolutions, regulations to help that discriminated group. So I started with some very specific things that happened concerning women. Something called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, which happened in, I believe, 1911 or 1912, in which there was a factory, a sewing factory. They were sewing together shirts, basically. And it was all women. Most of them were young. Some of them were as young as like 12 years old. And almost every one of them were poor and immigrant. Okay? And what's going to happen is, to make sure that they didn't leave work, that they stayed there for the hours they were supposed to. They didn't take breaks, because breaks and stuff were not allowed yet. That wasn't something that was a law. the people in charge would lock the women into their factory. So they didn't have a way out. They might have a door that says exit, but that doesn't mean you could leave because they were locked inside. Well, what's going to happen is there's going to be a big fire. They're not 100% sure how it happened. They think it was probably a cigarette that was put in a trash can. And this particular factory is on the top 3 floors of a New York City high-rise building. So it's, I believe it's the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors are going to be this factory. And what's going to happen is the doors are locked and there's a fire on the inside. So all of these women, they can't get out. And some of them are going to burn to death. Some of them are going to jump to their death. And the fire department, when they do show up, they don't have a ladder high enough to get their hose to do anything to this fire. So I want to say almost 200 women are going to perish either by way of smoke inhalation, being burned to death, or jumping to their death. And what comes out of it is good, though. It sounds kind of bad that that happened, but out of tragedy, a lot of times good things do happen. And what's going to happen is the beginnings of unions, employment unions, are going to be created, and workplace safety is going to be looked at by the government finally, which again, that goes back to bureaucracy. I'll remember OSHA. Things like that are going to come out of this tragedy. But that's the plight of many immigrant women, specifically in the early 1900s, is they didn't have any rights. And so they were locked up in their factory and there were no safety precautions that were taken. So after that, there are going to be safety precautions that are going to be created. There's going to be unions to help the workplace, laws created to make sure that, everything is safer. And we're going to have congressional decisions to work to have better treatment for women. The 19th Amendment, yay! It's the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment this year, you guys. It's exciting. The 19th Amendment is going to happen. Now, interestingly enough, the 19th Amendment, because people were set in their ways, a lot of women ended up not voting, even though they were given the right to. Specifically, Southern women were not allowed to, well, not allowed, but they didn't want to go and vote because they felt that things like politics that's a man's thing to deal with. So a lot of Southern women didn't go and vote for a really long time just because that's the way things were. Tradition is crazy. In 1963, we're going to have what's called the Equal Pay Act, which is going to be a guy gets this job, a lady gets the same job, they get paid the same, okay? Before that, it was not like that at all. There is still some, it's not exactly 100% dollar for dollar, but specifically in things like law, a lot of female lawyers will make less. But for the most part, it is 100% equal pay. The National Organization for Women, a feminist movement interest group, is going to be created in 1966, which is going to fight for women. So we have the fighters for the 19th Amendment for the voting rights. Well, now we're going to move into the 60s, and we're going to have these different groups, interest groups, that are going to work for all kinds of other rights for women. One of them would be what's called Title IX, which comes in 1972, which is going to be an addition to the Civil Rights Act that we were already talking about, where it forces places to have specifically sports. It forces high schools, it forces colleges to have an equal sport at the same time as male sports. So we don't have a female football team, but we do have something that the males do not have at the same season, which is volleyball. Okay, so it's going to force women's sports into school systems and things like that. So an example I have is concerning LSU. LSU was forced to create women's sporting teams in the 1970s that they did not have. Things like softball and soccer and women's basketball and stuff like that is going to be created because of Title IX, because women were not being given things like scholarships and stuff because they didn't have the sport. So it allows for women to have more opportunity, okay? In 1973, 1 year after Title IX comes out, we have Roe versus Wade, which luckily we can't debate that because we're not live, but Roe versus Wade is dealing with abortion. And we've tapped on abortion a couple of times in class and you guys get really uncomfortable. So the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment is going to be brought up in this particular case. It's going to legalize abortion in the first trimester, which is the first trimester is the first 3 months of life within a pregnancy. And every state has kind of taken it and done different things with it. So it has become, excuse me, a big deal. And in the last year, if y'all paid attention to what was going on, certain states have made some very big moves by way of their governors concerning abortion. So Roe versus Wade is going to be something that's very topical in the next, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Because of what is going on with different states making their own specific laws concerning abortion. Y'all remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the cute little old 87-year-old justice on the Supreme Court? Well, she was a big deal. Remember, I told you that she was feisty and she is loud. In the 60s and 70s, she was super feisty and super loud, specifically about rights concerning women and women's bodies. She had a lot of scrutiny concerning the Equal Protection Clause and how it was dealt with concerning Roe versus Wade. If you want to, I'm going to try and figure out how we can do this, because there is a movie that came out about her last year called On the Basis of Sex. Try to watch it if you can. Maybe we can have a movie review or something. It's a really good movie, and it explains a lot of what was going on with women as a discriminated group during that time period, and also her as a discriminated woman in her field. It was not the norm for women to become lawyers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. That was not normal at all. So it's a really good movie. Y'all should watch it. So if we look at when did discrimination begin concerning women, we can go back to the very beginning of our country. Women were not included in most of the things concerning the United States government. We couldn't vote. We weren't really talked about in the Constitution. There's a lot of stuff that really did not deal with women at all. Where was the discrimination most common? This is a nationwide thing. It's not like women had it better off in a certain area, whereas we could possibly say some of that concerning African Americans. Certain places, it was better. Why did Americans dislike this group? It's not so much that women are disliked, but we were considered kind of the lesser of the two. How did Americans demonstrate their dislike? Mostly concerning the things that I have listed there. Being considered the lesser sex, we had a lot of things we had to jump over, get through. We weren't banned from certain things like bathrooms and water fountains and stuff like that, but there were things that we were just never able to do, like voting. Something as simple as having our voices heard was not allowed until 1920. And that's not a very long time ago, guys. When did conditions improve? I would probably say around the time where I started talking in here. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory with helping women have a voice in the workplace. The 19th Amendment are going to be, so kind of like the 19 teens is a big jumping point for good things for women. All right. And then our actions, government actions, I have a list of them right there. 19th Amendment, Equal Pay Act, the 1972 Civil Rights Act with the addition of Title IX, Roe versus Wade is good and bad depending on the side that you're on. So yeah, those are going to be your different government actions that are going to take place. Now, let's look at LGBTQ. That is going to be in your book on page 326 to 333. It's really interesting because it's a group of people that we don't really get a chance to talk about in history classes. A lot of it has to do with the subject in general has been very taboo for so long. I love talking about LGBTQ rights. I think it's incredibly interesting, and it's kind of a forgotten group in a lot of cases. So let's start kind of talking about them. Now, for the most part, LGBTQ has existed forever. It's, it was promoted in different armies of our past. It was, so it's not like this is something that just popped up in the 20th and 21st century. However, stuff started happening concerning the LGBTQ groups in the 1940s and 50s after World War II. There was a big push against sexual, what they called perversion, okay? And a lot of times they were lumped up with communists. So there was an executive order in the 1950s. Our president at the time basically banned any kind of sexual perversion. Now, what that means is any type of sexual behavior that is not your typical consensual male and female sexual behavior. Okay, that's what was considered sexual perversion. Immigrants that were trying to come into the United States in the 1950s were being turned away if they were gay or communist. Now, a gay communist would definitely be kicked out and not be allowed in, but that was one of their things to scrutinize. Are you gay or are you communist? Yes to one of those. Sorry, you can't come in. There were actual congressional acts that were put in place concerning that. Within the military, in 1992, our president at the time signed something called the Don't Ask, Don't Tell legislation, which is concerning specifically, are you gay or not? If you are, don't talk about it, period, if you're in the military. If you're in the military, don't ask about it, period, okay? And if you think about it, that's a huge deal to keep something so personal about yourself squished down. You can never, ever talk about it if you are in the military. That has since been wiped out. It is no longer there. All right, DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. In 1996, after Hawaii being the first to legalize same-sex marriage, the Defense of Marriage Act is going to be something that is defending what marriage actually is. And in a Judeo-Christian society, marriage is man and woman, okay? So the Defense of Marriage Act is basically hitting on that, saying it is man and woman. But Hawaii is going to be like, hold up, I'm my own state. And if we go back to that 10th Amendment, marriage is mine. I can do what I want with that. So they are going to legalize same-sex marriage, which is technically a full faith and credit clause issue. So if you get married in Hawaii and during this time, then anybody can get married, right? Because it's a legal document. Full faith and credit clause says that if this document happened in this state and they move to another state, I am supposed to look at that document and it is still legal. So it's an interesting argument that's going to happen since 1996 when all these states started legalizing marriage. Through the Defense of Marriage Act, they're basically going to say we can get married, and states are going to determine whether or not they're going to look at that document and say, that is a legal binding document from Hawaii. Yes, you are married here as well. And that's where we end up hitting the Marriage Equality Act that's going to come out of Obergefell versus Hodges, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Now, Lawrence versus Texas in 2003. I'm talking about a lot of these government actions. Lawrence versus Texas is interesting. It's going to concern the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, but it's interesting because it's about something that has nothing to do what the court case is about. What's going to happen is Lawrence, okay? Lawrence is in the state of Texas. The cops have a warrant to search his premises for whatever. Doesn't matter what. Just know they have a warrant to go and search. Well, when the cops barge into Lawrence's hotel room, he was living in a hotel. When they came into the hotel room, Lawrence was a gay male with another gay male. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that because this is not sex ed class, but anyway. And what's going to happen is the cops are not going to search, they're going to arrest. And they're arresting him because Texas has what's called an anti-sodomy law, which says that homosexual sex is not allowed in Texas. So what's going to happen is he is going to be brought to court, and this is going to make its way up to the Supreme Court, and it's going to be called Lawrence versus Texas. And what's going to happen is in 2003, the Supreme Court is going to use the Equal Protection Clause and say his rights were seriously violated. You can't do that, police. So it's interesting, and it's a good step forward concerning gay rights. And a lot of states are going to get rid of their anti-sodomy laws because of Lawrence versus Texas. Now, moving on, 2015, very recent. In July of 2015, the end of the Obergefell versus Hodges case is going to happen, and the end result of it is basically a blanket statement from the Supreme Court that says any marriage to any human is okay. Okay? Not multiple humans. That's polygamy. That's still illegal. But any marriage to any human is okay. So that is going to hit every state differently. Some states are going to already have legalized marriage for all. Some states still have that little piece that says their gay marriage is not legal. Well, after 2015, every single state has to allow gay marriage, period. Okay? So that's a huge step forward for the LGBTQ community. There's going to be workplace discriminations that still exist. Louisiana, it still exists in Louisiana, where there's no protections for the LGBTQ community, so they can be discriminated against concerning work. Title IX and transgender issues are current issues that are being dealt with concerning sports. There are multiple states right now that have court cases going on concerning transgender students specifically that have gone through the full surgical transformation from male to female or female to male, and they want to compete in sports with their new sex identity. And people that are in those different sports are saying there's a fairness issue involved. And but like I said, multiple states currently have court cases right now concerning specifically Title IX and transgender issues. So that's something that's going to come up in the next few years as well, probably in the Supreme Court, making decisions concerning transgender issues. So this is, LGBTQ is kind of a new and ongoing process that they're seeing. So when did discrimination begin? Y'all, it's been there. It's been there for forever. Where was discrimination most common? Again, that's like females. It's anywhere it exists for the most part. Why did Americans dislike this group? A lot of this comes down to the Judeo-Christian belief of man and woman, and that anything else is not correct. How did Americans demonstrate their dislike? We have multiple things that have happened. There have been murders, there have been beatings, there have been, hangings of people of the LGBTQ community throughout history. One of the most prominent ones happened in the 1990s to I think he was 17-year-old. His name was Matthew Shepard. He had come out and he was later found tied to a barbed wire fence, beaten to death. All because he came out. So it's not like it's something that doesn't happen or it's new. It's still happening today. And so that's something that needs to, this is the group of people that are still in a battle. That's a very big battle right now, to have the same rights as everybody else. When did conditions improve? It is a slow process for this group. Conditions are going to start to improve in the 1990s. Okay, so think about that. That's very, very recent to have the first real improvements. And then we're still working on things. There's still no employment, protection. We finally got marriage equality. Then there's the transgender issues that are still happening. So this is something that is ongoing. So we've talked about kind of the oldest group, the African Americans, and how their rights were discriminated and have slowly, through the course of a couple hundred years, basically, have gotten to a point where we can say this is we're doing good. Then women, that process kind of started in the 1900s and has moved forward to where we're doing pretty good. There's still discrimination. There's still discrimination of African Americans. And then we have the LGBTQ community, which is kind of the newest one to kind of work towards anti-discriminatory practices. And it's a slow process for each one of these groups. Now there's other groups. Don't forget, we have Disabled, whether it be mental disabilities or physical disabilities, they are still discriminated against. Now they do have a big act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that helps them out. But I mean, y'all have been to school, y'all see how people treat people with disabilities. There are, you know, immigrants. Our current immigrant group is going to be specific to, you know, Central and South America right now. There's discriminatory activity that happens towards them. There are Native Americans. So there's all kinds of other groups, but I stuck to the big three that the book talks about. Y'all need to read the chapter concerning these different groups, because it's very interesting to see how similar each group is, even though they're vastly different. One is race, one is sex, one is the LGBTQ sexual orientation group. Very different groups, but have very much the same kind of process that they have to go through to get their rights. Okay? All right, guys, I am going to peace out. I'm going to upload this, and hopefully you guys will watch and have followed along how you should have. Remember, your rights are protections from the government, and then we're going to talk about what liberties are, your civil liberties are, the next time I see you. Toodaloo!